I believe going into retail as the last resort, even though 90% of food products are still bought in store, you can just learn so much and get to a point of high profitability and like actually having a business that can do real things. I generally think that that's a better path, just because being the size we're at right now, having over 1 million people on our email list, we can go to a Whole Foods when we want to go into retail and go, hey, look, give us a national rollout, because we can support and we can use all our affiliates and our email lists and push people into your stores. We've tested our product. People like it. This has this many sales online already. We have this many people who can push into your stores. You just have far more leverage. You have more operating cash flow. If you try to go to retail too early, like the cash conversion cycle is just completely messed up. It can sometimes take over a year to get paid back from the distributors when your product gets out. And unless you raise money, like getting into retail early on without being profitable online for us is a death sentence.
You're listening to the E-commerce Influence Podcast with Austin Brawner and Andrew Foxwell. If you want honest, transparent, and tangible results that deliver lasting value and revenue, this is your podcast.
It's safe to say that most of us have been doing a lot more shopping online lately. And if you're an e-commerce brand, that means you might be seeing more first-time customers. Once they've made that first purchase, how do you keep them coming back? That's what Klaviyo is for. Klaviyo is the ultimate marketing platform for e-commerce brands. Klaviyo gives you the tools to build your contact list, to send memorable emails, automate those key messages, and more. A lot more. That's why more than 40,000 e-commerce brands like Chubbies, 8 Sleep, and Living Proof, including most of my clients, use Klaviyo to build a loyal following. Strong customer relationships mean more repeat sales, enthusiastic word of mouth, and less depending on expensive third-party ads. Whether you're launching a new business or taking your brand to the next level, Klaviyo can help you get growing faster. Plus, it's free to get started. Just visit klaviyo.com/influence to create your free account today. That's klaviyo.com/influence. As an e-commerce entrepreneur, you shouldn't expect to be the best at everything, and you probably don't have time to learn to be the best. So when your email isn't performing like you think it should, and you don't have time to manage it yourself, who should you call? When that happens to my clients, I call Sully at eCom Growers. They've helped 2 of our clients double their email revenue in 30 days. eCom Growers was co-founded by a successful Shopify store owner-operator, Tyler Sully Sullivan. You may remember Sully from previous episodes of this show, his posts in Shopify Facebook groups, or his own 7-figure store, Bomb Tech Golf. If you want to see how much more revenue you could be driving with email, go to ecomgrowers.com to apply for your free email blueprint. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the E-commerce Influence Podcast. My name's Austin Brawner, and I am very excited to bring you an episode today with a good friend of mine. We have a conversation much like the conversations that I've had with him as we've walked around Austin, Texas, around the lake or at the park, talking about business and about life. Today's guest is a very impressive entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of Perfect Keto and Equip Foods. And during the conversation today, we talk a lot about how Perfect Keto has grown, what it's meant for him. They've been on some rocket ship growth. I think at one point he mentions they sold about $100 million worth of products in the first 19 months of them operating. So it's been crazy growth curve, unlike many other companies out there. We go into a bunch of different kind of facets of what that's meant for the business, what that's meant for him personally. We talk about burnout, keeping stamina and keeping drive when you're going through this kind of crazy period of growth like this. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you are an e-commerce entrepreneur and you are in the state of growth or you want to grow similar to the way Perfect Keto has grown, this is a great conversation to get an inside look on what it's like to be on the other side of that. So let's bring Anthony onto the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Dude, well, this is a pleasure for me because I always enjoy talking about business with you. We've gone on many walks around Austin in the blistering heat, talking about just like business, life. And so I'm excited to sit here and just, kind of dive into it with you. One thing I wanted to start with is on your website, you call yourself a fitness and food skeptic. I've never asked you about this. What does that mean to you?
I just think that so much orthodox thinking in anything, but my whole thing is like health. That's what I care about the most, is so bogus. And so whenever anybody says anything, even about business, health, food, fitness, I'm generally a skeptic of that. And I think also to go a little bit deeper, people like to generalize individual success in any discipline, but also health, and apply that broadly to everybody. And then everybody tries to do what works for somebody else, and that never works. And so I think it's like also sort of a nod to me saying like, you should probably always be asking yourself the question, like, is this the right thing for me? Does this make sense at all for where I'm at? So that's what I'm always trying to do myself.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I feel similarly around you're talking about health and food around business. You mentioned that, like, even this podcast, I bring on a lot of people. We talk about the way that they built their business. And it's really interesting because everyone's a little bit different, right? And if you try to copy what other people do without understanding what's right for you, it generally doesn't work.
No, never. I think all disciplines in life, like, people don't often just look down at where they're standing in their own feet and say, okay, from where I want to go, from where I am, but what steps do I have to take?
Sure.
And if somebody else is somewhere else, like, their journey would have been very, very different. And so looking where you're at and where you want to go, like, you can't always just model somebody else's success in the playbook that they've ran, because it can be very, very different from where you're at.
Sure. Well, diving into your playbook a little bit, as we talk about this, it's interesting from the outside perspective. If anyone's looked at the keto world, right, and they're familiar with it, Perfect Keto is kind of a juggernaut, like a big company in the keto space, big footprint online. But I know from our conversations that really wasn't the vision when you guys first kicked off. Almost, it sounds like, from a conversation I had with you in the past, it almost like got there in a sense by accident. What was the catalyst for starting Perfect Keto? What's kind of some of the backstory? How did that get started?
Yeah. So before I was at Perfect Keto and started that, another company. And before that, I was functional medicine doing sports med in San Francisco. So I had 5 different clinics. And I had started another company called Equip Foods. I just noticed that working with either athletes or people who had gut issues, diabetes, things like that, sort of the biggest lever you could pull to help somebody with health was improve their nutrition. And the biggest thing that people were doing is eating really nasty packaged processed food. And so I made this company called Equip to give people, I was working with a lot of high-end athletes at the time, a 100% grass-fed beef protein powder with no weird additives, excipients, preservatives, flavorings, stabilizers, things like that. And launched sort of a real food line based upon that: sweet potato powder, greens powder, etc. That way, when they got the product, sort of could use it as a Trojan horse to then send them either emails or with them directly and say, "This is great. How do you feel? Good. Awesome. This is what else you need to look at." And we talked about the other night, like, power of email flows, very, very effective content and things like that. And so sort of a sneaky way to find where people were making choices who needed help, and sort of create a bridge for people who otherwise, I grew up super overweight in the Midwest, middle of nowhere, eating just like ridiculous, like a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch a day, just like ridiculous stuff like that.
Oh, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Yeah. Cookie Crisp, Count Chocolate.
I love it. Yeah. I loved it.
Toaster strudels. And now I eat like mostly from stuff that's local and seasonal. I try to hunt a lot of my own meat, and it's not like I just snapped my fingers and was there one day. And so thinking about, like, okay, from the little fat kid who knew nothing about nutrition to where I am now, like, how did that bridge happen, and how can I speed that up and make that bridge shorter for other people? And this is why it's sometimes confusing when I talk about health in general. It's like, this is what I think people should do: eat real local seasonal food. You go, well, you have all these products. And I'm like, yes, but this is like for the people who are sort of walking on this path. And I always prefer people to, if they can, eat that real food. So fast forward a little bit, met a friend. It started like a little CPG meetup in San Francisco where I was living. Turns out there was like 5 people in all of San Francisco who were doing any sort of actual CPG product, because everybody else is trying to like do Uber for dogs or whatever bullshit that they thought was cool they could raise $10 million on. And so through that, met my co-founder of Perfect Keto, Gustin Mares. He looked at the numbers from Equip in my clinic. He's like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, you need to sell your clinic right now and focus on this, because Equip was doing roughly about what my clinic was doing. And I was just doing it before and after patient hours by myself. I had no employees at that point. And so I said, okay, sounds good. I guess I'll go in all over here, because he had way more of a mind of like, this can scale really big. You can help a lot more people. You can always go back to being a clinician. So it was like a couple of weeks later, I ended up selling my clinic. So it was like really, really fast. I had a business partner that I had parted ways to. So it was like really easy. And I was like, okay, now I'm like sort of left this entire career that I spent last 10 years focusing on, and now I'm going to do this. And then him and I started working every day together, bouncing off ideas. And I was sort of waiting to do something in a ketogenic space. There weren't any ingredients that were commercially available yet. So with product ingredients, there needs to be something called GRAS status for them to be sold and consumed for humans. So generally regarded as safe. And there was something in the keto market that I thought was palatable or affordable. There's like one or two companies. Then when one came out, I was like, okay, this doesn't really fit in the whole food thing, but ketogenic diet was something I was using with a lot of my patients and myself for 5 years before that. I was pretty familiar with it. I knew sort of, where I was going to go. This is before Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and a lot of these people started talking about it a lot, which was, I don't know, mid 2016. And so I didn't want to do another business by myself. I'd already been doing another one. So I asked Justin if he wanted to launch a little side project, and he said yes. And so we launched that in November of 2016 as just this like, everybody thought it was like some big thing where we planned out and strategized. Like you said, it was like we sort of like backed into it. And like
were you guys trying to save for a trip or something like that?
Yeah. So like we never celebrate at all. Like we were like both doing very well, being that we just had started these businesses that had no idea what the hell we were doing. And so we just like both worked way too much, still do, I would say, him more than me at this point. But we were like, okay, like what can we do to celebrate? Like, okay, once we get to 20K in a month, we will go to Japan. Cause like we always wanted to go to Japan and all that stuff. And then I think we hit that within 4 hours of launch. And then within 3 months, then Perfect Keto was outpacing Equip. And it was just sort of took off like a rocket ship after that. So it's been a super wild ride.
That's absolutely insane. So it was not, I think it's always interesting to hear that story, because sometimes from the outside looking in, people will think like, oh, they might had everything mapped out in the beginning. They knew all the steps to get there. And no, it was like launched, you hit on something, and then boom, started going really, really well. So day one, 4 hours, you did $20,000.
Yeah, it was wild.
Was it right then that you knew it was going to be really, really big, or how quickly did you recognize this was going to take over and push some of the other projects to the side?
Yeah. So I would say that we got really lucky in timing as well, just because when we had like bought the domain, put in the POs, I was formulating the products. This was like right when people started talking about it, and Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss both had on keto people. And so by the time the products had launched, there was one brand available that was $90 per 15 servings of ketones. And ketones are just things that you can take and put into water and mix up, but they're the actual molecule that you get when you use fat for fuel. So you break down fat into ketones. You can use ketones instead of carbohydrates for fuel.
I remember that. What were those called again?
It was called Keto Kana, and it was like $90, had 4 reviews on Amazon, and they're all 1 star. And it was a terrible design and branding. It's an awful product. And Justin and I just both really enjoy marketing. And so when we looked at this space, we're like, okay, like we were still like, we launched at $60, I think, and had pretty decent margins like at launch. Like there's no reason why it needed to be $90. They were just like price gouging everybody. And so being able to provide somebody a better alternative, but also way better flavors. Like we had launched products that were way, way better than that. But as well, like sort of the biggest things that I saw in my clinic that people had problems with were adherence to the actual diet, because it's really, really difficult. Especially back then, there was no articles on this. You search ketosis, how to do ketosis. Most of them were sort of like scare blogs from doctors who are confusing ketosis and ketoacidosis, which is something that happens when your pancreas doesn't function, basically. So building a content sort of reservoir that could educate people, but also a suite of products that could sort of help them through their initial journey was sort of the plan. But we saw that, we go, okay, no one's on Amazon. No one's like, there's some budding like keto sort of influencers. No one was working with them. No one was doing content. So that was sort of like our plan. Like we did have a plan of that. We knew there was white space. Yeah. We didn't know we were timing like the biggest diet craze of the last 50 years as well as we had. Like I think that was just pure luck, but we were positioned in a way where we were able to capture sort of the upside and react really, really quickly. Luckily, Justin already had Kettle Fire started and a lot of digital marketing background, and I already had Equip and a lot of health background. So I think those two things combined, things were happening really, really quickly, but we were able to react and make really good decisions because of our experience before that. But I would think like within the first month, I was juggling both Perfect Keto and Equip stuff, and I like already started like reducing my hours working on Equip. And then, within 3 months, it was like, okay, I need to like take this over 100% full time, sort of neglect everything that Equip was doing, which is totally fine. And I think was the right decision.
No, it sounds like you were just perfectly positioned with the fact that you had the knowledge about the diet that a lot of people didn't have at that time. And then combine that with some skills to be able to actually capitalize on it. You and I have talked a lot about like beliefs around building brands, especially in the CPG space, what works, what doesn't work. What are some of your beliefs now after building a company, specifically like a direct-to-consumer online brand that might be a little bit uncommon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of sad that to be uncommon and say that you should be providing value to people and solving problems. I fundamentally think that should be the case. And I think that you'll see CPG blow up and direct to consumer especially blow up. They're just trying to be like the 8th like ceramic pan company to launch, or the 19th mattress brand to launch. And the world isn't getting helped from like the 19th direct to consumer mattress brand. And so many people are just trying to jump on the bandwagon to make money. I think like looking at, okay, is there a problem that I can solve uniquely that like no one else is attacking right now? And for us, it was like making keto easy. And I think that we can chat about sort of like my transition out of the business day to day, but I think we sort of like achieved that. And I'm always sort of obsessed, like what problem can I solve? How can I serve a community? How can I like be useful to other people in my business first? And I think that's really, really rare in the direct consumer world. I think it's like all an arbitrage of, where is there sort of like, can I do like the 18th pet gummy food thing? It's like, I don't know. I get sort of really pissed off when people do that, or when marketers come in and try to sell something as healthy or better or unique just because they're selling it direct to consumer or has good branding or really bad branding. Either way. And so I think that like making actually good products that solve problems is that are like in an authentic way and not sort of like the sleazy, scammy thing. I don't know. I find that to be like 95% brands.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to see, being in my vantage point and being able to see a lot of different businesses and where they're struggling. The ones who solve the product issue early and provide a lot of value don't have the same issues that the other companies have, right?
What type of issues? Like marketing issues and scaling issues?
The ones they have, most businesses struggle with acquiring customers, right? Like, and being able to connect, find something that people want. If you solve the product problem first and you actually have something people want, your problems are very different, right? And
well, this is like what I think a business should be. I mean, I think another uncommon belief is that businesses should be profitable.
Yeah.
If you can't validate what your customers actually want and make a product that makes more money than it costs to ship it out, then it's just a terrible business.
Well, especially in the CPG space, right? Because you're selling in a physical product space.
Right. This isn't like you're trying to scale Uber or something like that. It's a very different story.
Klaviyo, right? Yeah. Klaviyo's example that could be, I think they were profitable, but like you could have run unprofitably for a while because, well, everybody's paying Klaviyo thousands of dollars a month, and there's almost no way to like switch your service once you're locked into a software company.
But yeah, I mean, this is sort of the traditional CPG route. I mean, it's changing now. There's direct to consumer, but I have some idea that people are going to want this weird granola bar because it's like whatever brand, these rice protein crisps. And then they make it, they raise a bunch of money, they make 10,000 units, hope to get it into retail, maybe only get it in some stores. It doesn't sell into retail because people don't actually like it. And then the company folds. That's like sort of traditional CPG. You may have a hypothesis of what is valuable, but you don't know that until you start testing the market. And this is why, like in the beginning, we started with supplement products as well. They're easy to manufacture. You can like manufacture them within 6 weeks. You can do really low runs. They're shelf stable. You can ship them easily. And these are all these things where you can start validating. Like we were on within 6 months, I think the 9th iteration of our product. It's making it better and better and better and better and better. And I think like this obsession with the product that like you mentioned just solves all of the problems in the business. I think if you don't have a good product and you're not profitable, I think you just have a terrible business. That's my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you guys sounds like you guys are almost treating it like you would treat software, in the sense that you're trying to iterate and improve consistently and make sure that the product is getting better and better.
Yeah. Which you can optimize for when you're online, but once you start going to retail, that's just game's over. And that's why we've stayed for consumer sort of ever since. Like now we're exploring retail, and we're going to start going to it at the end of this year, early next year. But now we have a massive business that with products that are validated. Our bars, for example, I think they're in like the 10th or 12th iteration. And like we're now ready because we're like, okay, mass amount of people want these things. And now we can go to retail confidently.
It's the same, listening to Moiz Ali from Native talk a little bit about his journey with iterating deodorant again and again and again. Thinking of it the exact same way. It was like, all right, let's fix this formula over and over again until they got something that really, really worked well before. Obviously a good solid exit over there.
Yeah, I think that is good with product, but also I think that is good with pretty much anything you do in the business, within the business, especially marketing. I mean, the more you can iterate, document, sort of improve, like, does this work? Does this not work? Yes or no? Run playbooks, scale. Like, I think that that's another way of like talking about reacting and capturing the growth while we had a chance to. And just having this sort of as a culture that everybody learn as fast as humanly possible. And not necessarily like the whole Facebook move fast and break things, like not that aggressive, I would say. But I mean, just try a bunch of stuff and learn and ask people and get feedback and design it like a science experiment so you can actually get data from it and then improve and keep going.
Well, I want to transition a little bit into kind of your journey. When I first met you, you were working a ton, or at least it was perceived. We were like hanging out, and you were always typically like working on weekends, working super long hours. And in the last 6 months, it's changed drastically. I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, what's changed and what's happened.
Yeah, I think that I've always been obsessed with health and solving problems within health and helping people be healthier. But I've been sort of at this pace of grinding and working 14-hour days plus since I was like 14. And I think it was just like, it was too much. And I've always sort of been like, I went undergrad straight through summers in 3 years. Then I went to grad school after a summer of classes, like took 2 weeks off, went to grad school, went summers through, took a doctorate and master's program, nights and weekends classes, worked through that, and then graduated on a Friday, started working in my clinic on a Monday. While I was at my clinic, started to quip. When I was doing a quip, started Perfect Keto. Like, it's just been constant work. And I think that another thing of like what is uncommon about a business, I think that the way I approach it, at least, and how I want to spend my time, is it needs to be something that I sort of have an insatiable curiosity about. So, that was the same thing. Like when I went into my clinic the first time, it was like helping people not have physical pain. And then that became easy, and it became helping people with systemic issues. And then it was like, okay, how do I scale a product business? And then it was, how do I help people with keto? And then it was just like my sort of fire of what I was in, like, I was just dead inside, sort of like after the peak of Perfect Keto craziness, which is like such an artificial growth path. I mean, if that would have grown the same way over 5-7 years, I don't think I would have gotten to the same point of just extreme burnout. I think it only took us like 19 months or 18 months to get to $100 million in sales, which is insane. And so like the amount of stress after that, it was like sort of this like peak, and then we came like crashing down, and we like built things back up, and it was just like back and forth craziness all the time, and just like massive amount of pressure. Like once this rocket ship was starting to like rattle and a few pieces were starting to fly off, and it was like my sort of excitement about life in general and what I was interested in, like everything went to zero. And then I was there for like almost a year, and it was miserable. And it was like at a certain point, I had enough. And I thought like, there's no, like, one, I'm not interested in this problem anymore. 2, I'm not having fun. And 3, there's no way like this is a sustainable path for me. The money isn't important. Like, it was like, I'm not trying to vie for some like crazy huge exit or to be some like startup celebrity or anything like this. I just am interested in solving problems and being valuable to the world. And when I thought that, okay, I'm not being valuable anymore, and I'm not solving any problems that I think are fun, it was just time to get out. And so like that was sort of a difficult thing to not necessarily face, but like go through the process of like being burned out, but also having enough like reserves to sort of power through and keep the business running while we found like a good person who could come in and take the reins and like build from here. And like that was like brutal stuff. It was like so much like just getting up every day and just being like exhausted, not wanting to do anything, and like needing to power through just because like no one else could do it. So certainly have learned some like different approaches to business since then. And it's been like a really interesting time because we hired this new CEO in February and he started basically in early March. So he had 2 weeks before lockdown hit. And so it's been this like wild year. But as we were going through all of that, he's been taking more and more off my plate. And I think like end of May is sort of like when all of my day-to-day responsibilities have been gone. And now I'm looking back, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling way, way better. Basically just spent time taking care of myself physically, mentally, starting to get interested in a lot of things. Like now that interest and curiosity of problem solving is back the way like I know I should have like sort of my drive, my fire.
Your natural state is to be interested in certain things and scratch your own itch.
It's like it's insatiable curiosity where I'll download 50 books and read them all in like a couple of months and just I won't be able to stop thinking about certain things, like how to solve certain problems. And like once that was dead last year, I'm like, oh, something is wrong. I mean, not only that, but like physical energy, like mental and emotionally was just torched. So like realizing that, pulling back was probably the hardest thing I've done in the last 10 years. I'm much happier now. Like looking back, even for Perfect Keto, like we've done so much stuff, like did about 100 podcasts, launch a book, Keto Answers, like detailing everything I know about it. We've done like over 1,000 articles and recipes on our website, launched 70 plus products, like worked with all the top influencers. Like I don't know what else to do to help people at this point with a ketogenic diet. Like we've sort of like done it all. Like we have like our product pipelines built out for the next 3 years. So like I just don't feel valuable anymore myself. Like I like just solving problems more and more and more. Like I don't know what else to do for people here. I mean, there's things tangentially, but when a business gets to a point, especially a CPG brand, like you sort of have to stay in your lane, unfortunately. Like there's not a lot of creative things you can do if you sort of like want to do the path of scaling a CPG brand. Like once you get to the point where we're at, where you're really established and you're going into retail, it makes it much more difficult to structure a business and have the people in-house to do like very different, weird things on the side, which is like totally fine. But I just knew that like
that's where you get your excitement.
Yeah. I just knew like it was sort of like time for me to be like, okay, I've lit and carried this torch for a very long time. And now it's time to like trust the team into like taking it to the finish line. And like, I can't stand personally rules of a game that can't be bent or broken. So when you're scaling and selling stuff online and doing digital marketing, as you know, like you can sort of like make up your own rules a lot of time, sort of create your own path to success. Whereas when you're scaling through retail, you have to play this old boys game of like, get a broker, like sell to people. And like, this guy knows this other gal here at Whole Foods who can get you into this region. And once you prove out you're there, you can go to that region. And it's just, it sucks so bad. Like you have to work with these distributors that are crooks. You have to like get in these retail stores. Like you have no connection to the consumer. It's just like a game that I knew I didn't want to have any part of. Even though like I know it's going to help a lot of people and like we'll be able to get our product in front of a lot of people's hands. It was like not exciting to me at all to play that game.
When you think back to like before you started Perfect Keto, what's one thing that you wish you'd known before going down this path?
This is going to be sort of a controversial thing, I would say, but like, I was of the camp early on that like making money was bad and like doing things for making money is bad. And I wish I just would have gotten over that early on and intentionally like made money passively so I could then worry about doing bigger things. So I think that if you're having to like have a company and that company is responsible for paying all your bills, like I've seen it time and time again with myself and with other people. Like once you have something passively running that can pay your bills, that you don't have to worry about like taking risk in your own business, you can just focus on building something without worrying about it collapsing because it's your livelihood. I would have launched and got anything to scale immediately. So I could just be like, okay, this is taken care of. And now I can set that to the side and worry about building over here. And I wish I would just been more honest with myself. And I was telling myself all these stories about, oh, I'm just being greedy and being selfish. But I think diversifying that and like taking risk out of the equation allows you to just focus on sort of reaching for larger goals and being more aggressive within a business.
Sure. It makes you be able to think more long term, right? Like totally. You can start thinking because your short term needs are taken care of, you can start building something and maybe it doesn't make money for a little bit of time, but your long-term vision is much larger for it, and that brings more and more people into it, has more of an impact. I think it depends on what circle, right? Because I think that matches up very well with a lot of like the more like personal finance circle mindset, where it's like, take care of your monthly expenses and just figure out how to do that so that then you have the beginning of financial freedom, which allows you to access so much more of your life. And I think that there's a double-edged sword where like often people make really big decisions that drive like crazy big businesses out of potentially like financial scarcity, but sometimes it doesn't lead to satisfaction or fulfillment, right? Like it's like started from, it's really interesting way to think about it. And I definitely agree with that as an exercise to like try to create something so that you then have the ability to think more clearly about what you might want.
Yeah. I mean, I think additionally too, it's like the easier answer would have been, oh, I would have told myself like not work as much or don't get burned out. But those things are cliche, and I'm of the camp of no regrets. I've learned what I've learned going through the experiences that I've had. And because things grew so fast, I developed so many skills in such a short period of time, which is great. I also burned out to an incredible degree, which was not fun, but I think sets me up to have the next 30, 40, 50 years of being able to approach things with like a really harsh lessons in place. And I think that if I wouldn't have done that, maybe I would have like always slipped out and like started having a family and pulling out and not thinking it's that big of a deal and like not really knowing what true balance really is and like what's important to me. And so I'm very glad that I went through the experience that I did.
Well, taking that to the next level, when you think about ventures in the future, right, and things you want to work on and create and projects and really problems you want to solve, because that's what you've been talking about kind of in this framework. How are you going to think about building something in the future, and in which way will it be different than how you've done it in the past?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot about hiring and team culture and motivating people and having people be aligned around a certain mission. And that's been super fascinating to me. I think there's a lot of things that we did right that I learned from, but there's also a lot of things that I wish I would have done better as far as assessing people for the right role at the right time and getting people with the right motives in. I think that, I mean, we're at a point like as fast as we grew with Perfect Keto, we just needed to get people in the door at a certain point. Like also unproven, didn't know how to recruit people. It was just this like really weird combo. Like I'd never done something like that before. Whereas now I think they were just like, especially the first 10, 20 people at a business, be very, very intentional about values being aligned and really wanting people that work on the same problem. So even if people are maybe like 20% less skills, but are matched 100% on values and the mission of like, we're solving this problem for the world that needs to be solved. I think that creating that core group of people initially is like really, really important. As far as sort of like launching a business, I would do it. I mean, I have more resources now, so it's a different thing, but less sort of like I built our first website on like WooCommerce and WordPress in like 3 hours, and it was like looked like shit. And like I made all our first labels, and like there's just a lot of things to fix as we went along that I'll take the extra 2 months at this point and not rush things so much. It's like a very different story too around like keto was just match. It was about to be lit. And then once it was lit, it turned into a dynamite. And so just making like good enough calls all the time ended up where we had to like look back. But I think like not having something tied too much to an explosively growing trend would be nice, and to just be able to take time and do things sort of right the first time so that there's a really good foundation. I think I would like to do that for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's an infinite amount of things to do differently always. And I think that you never know until you start doing another thing, like what lessons you actually learn, like, oh, I've seen this before sort of thing.
What are the things that draw your most interest, you're most curious about right now?
I think that talking earlier about like people should have access to real food, and it's actually extremely hard to scale that problem from so many different ways. Like we have such a weird food system that a lot of people don't understand. That's also tied to a really shitty healthcare system. And these two things are more linked than I think people realize. Once you fix the food system, like I think that those problems, once they're solved, the healthcare problems actually decrease in size. And so there's just like a whole multitude of problems here. And it's like sort of what I'm learning a lot about now. Like how do we grow our food? How does our food get distributed? Why does that cost the way it costs? And why are people not interested in real food? Like how do people get transitioned from eating packaged food to real food? And there's a lot of issues here. And there's some that are policy driven and there's some that are market driven. And it's like sort of interesting to think through this stuff. I'm still digging into. I got a lot to learn, but this is something I think that I want to focus on. I don't know what it looks like yet. But even like people at Force of Nature local here in Austin, like they're doing, for instance, regenerative meat sold at grocery stores and online. And like they're pushing sort of that whole thing from if people want it, they have farms that they'll do it and will scale through the farms. I think there's a lot of things in this, like this food supply issue. And also just like people locating certain farms. I don't even know when I go to a city, like I have to Google and use basically like 1998 maps to try to find something. It's like, it's such a weird system. Like the clarity and transparency around food is also maddening and impossible to figure out. Like you go to a restaurant, I'm pretty anti vegetable oil, as you know, and you go to a restaurant, like every single restaurant uses it. And like you ask the people, what is this cooked in? And 99% of the people have no idea. And then they go back and they look, they're like, oh, it's like some weird, this is olive oil. Like, okay, like can I actually look at the bottle? Bottle says like 99% canola oil with 1% olive oil. It's like all this stuff, like transparency around food is another thing. Like the alternative to vegetable oils. Like, I mean, there's so many things, I guess, in health overall, but more so like sourcing of ingredients, how they're used, how they're distributed, all this stuff. I don't know if I'd do like a direct to consumer CPG business again, unless there was like a really important wedge that could be done there. But I just don't find anything like I want to solve the problem more of like real food now.
For people who are in the DTC space, who are selling things online or thinking about going into wholesale, I know you said you're approaching that. What are some things that you think about with that dynamic that might be helpful for other people who are trying to decide if they're going to go down that path?
Into retail?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very dependent on the product set for sure. And I mean, I think that again, for us, like having all shelf stable products makes it really, really easy. If you have cold chain stuff,
ice cream. Yeah.
I mean, some people do direct consumer cold chain products, which I find to be bizarre. And like, again, we'll go back to, is your product good? Okay. Even if yes, are you profitable? And like, if you have to spend $30 per shipment, I don't know. I already don't feel good personally about shipping plastic tubs all over the planet, like let alone how much energy it takes to keep something cold on a truck one by one by one by one. Like, I mean, I think there's like environmental concerns there. If that's something you care about at all, I do. But yeah, I think it's like totally dependent on the product. Like I said, I think that always getting as much data up front as you can. And I believe going into retail as the last resort, even though 90% of food products are still bought in store, you can just learn so much and get to a point of high profitability and like actually having a business that can do real things. But like I would say, scale as much as you can on direct consumer first. I generally think that that's a better path, just because being the size we're at right now, having over 1 million people on our email list, we can go to a Whole Foods when we want to go into retail and go, hey, look, give us a national rollout, because we can support and we can use all our affiliates and our email lists and push people into your stores. And then now we have leverage. We've tested our product. People like it. This has this many sales online already. We have this many people who can push into your stores. You just have far more leverage. You have more operating cash flow. If you try to go to retail too early, like the cash conversion cycle is just completely messed up. It can sometimes take over a year to get paid back from the distributors when your product gets out. So like, especially if you're trying to bootstrap, we've never raised money. We've only been bootstrapped. And unless you raise money, like getting into retail early on without being profitable online first is a death sentence, I think.
I was talking to a friend who's trying to get into the Manhattan beverage cartel, basically. It's like get into Manhattan to like have his sodas there. He said at one point, he basically just realized he had to just cut like a $50,000 check. And that was just to get some placements. And they were like, give us 50 grand. We'll put you in places. There's no guarantees that you'll be reordered at all, but it's so competitive. That's what he had to do.
I guess, like I said, no old boys club where
exactly.
You have to play by the rules and grease things up. Sometimes like, I don't want to play that game personally.
Yeah. What's one piece of advice you'd share with somebody who's putting in super long work hours right now?
Oh, I think just pausing and reflecting more and asking yourself, like, is this what you want? Like, are you on the same path? Like, I don't think working 60 plus hours is inherently bad on its own. If that's aligned with all of your life's goals and purposes and sort of what your mission is, like that can be fine in some cases. Some people thrive on that. I actually was like relentless about, since I was in grad school through the beginning of last year as like a coincidental sort of happening that every month, quarter, and year, I do like these really rigorous reviews and like establish like where I'm at. When Perfect Keto started like getting this inflection point of like an exponential growth, I just didn't have time to do that anymore. I was like not taking time off. I think that if I would have taken more time to do like 2, 3, 4 day, sometimes monthly reviews where I like rip everything that I'm doing apart personally, like, you know, my physical health, my mental health, my relationships, spirituality, like all these types of things, like, am I going to where I want to be? I think that people just reflect enough of their actions. Is this what I want? Is this where I'm going? Then they can say, oh, this work is aligned with what I want to do, or what the fuck am I working so much for? But that's like a lot of time is really difficult to do. Like to take several days off and basically like be confronted with all of the distractions you were doing, like how much time it's been on Twitter, how much time you've been overworking. It's uncomfortable to have to think through, okay, how am I going to like basically redo my entire next month? How am I going to track towards it? How am I going to progress towards it? How am I going to keep myself honest? How am I going to sort of structure systems to keep myself going in the right direction? A lot of heavy lifting. I think that a lot of people like, sort of don't do that hard but necessary work. But I think that if I would have done that more and more and more throughout this inflection point, I wouldn't have gotten to that point where I had.
Sure. One of the things I recognize and acknowledge about you is your courage in doing that work and watching it over the last year. One of the things that stood out to me was when you went to Oregon last year and you were off the grid. Can you talk a little bit about Oregon and what that was like? Because I think that was a pivotal experience for you, and it ties in a little bit with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I just unplugged for the first time in a long time, and it was pretty much a month in the woods in a cabin, or Walden style.
Eating carnivore, right?
Yeah, I was like, so I was intentionally like very, very, very simple existence. And so I would get outside and walk for like 4 hours a day. And then I would just eat like the same exact thing every single day, wear the same thing every day, pretty much, like not have any sort of decisions or distractions. And I like being overweight when I was way younger. I think that sometimes I use food as a distraction when I get bored or whatever. And for me, it was sort of like a time to intentionally drive into boredom, like ask myself like why I need to always be doing something. And what I discovered over this time is like, I've basically been obsessed with and addicted to work since I was like really young. And now like going through that process and like working through that. I mean, it's probably like an addiction, like I probably will have to deal with the rest of my life. But I mean, looking back at a lot of my things, I think it was more of like a compulsion to work than it was a choice that I was excited about. I think it was like sort of controlling me. And I think looking at that path and like forcing myself to just like sit there, some days I like meditate for like 4 hours. And it was really brutal. It's like sometimes you just like want to scream and jump out of a window. But I think it was like confronting a lot of myself and just like asking myself like really hard questions and thinking about them, and sometimes just sitting on them for days at a time. But I think coming out of that now, I've like really established a new sort of appreciation for like using my time in general and being far more present. I was talking to my therapist about this, and she was saying that she's going to do like several Vipassana retreats. I have not, where like you do 10-day meditation. She said that this would be way harder because like there's no social pressure around you in times like this to be able to, everyone's doing meditation. Everyone's doing the same exact thing. Like I had to get myself on track and keep myself accountable. Like sometimes I'd be like noticing I was like starting a fire for the last 3 hours. I'm like, I'm just like doing this basically to distract myself because I'm so bored. Like I think that so many people, when they are on this entrepreneur train, especially, get so much validation out of accomplishing things and checking things off a to-do list. And I think like routinely breaking that habit is a really, really good thing. At least I can speak to myself. Like that's something that I get addicted to all the time, is just like feeling accomplishment and sort of like on to the next thing and never really appreciating like what I'm actually doing. There's this time where I was walking specifically. I just remember myself like trying to get to the end of this hike. And I stopped and I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like, the whole point is like being on the hike, not getting to the end of it. And then it was like immediately my mood shifted. And I was like the happiest I had been in like a year plus. And I was like laughing. And I just enjoyed it like the rest of the time. And like it was like a bizarrely different experience than it was like on there. And like I think that like, there's a lot of those things in that trip, just like pausing and reflecting. I think I'm very like lucky to have space in my life where I could take weeks out of my year to just go do something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's like a huge, huge challenge.
I think that it's just a parallel for building a business, right? Like the whole you on that hike, it's not about getting to the exit. It's about that journey. And like so much, there may be a vision for this like exit or the end of the business, which is what drives people. But so much of it is like the day to day. Like you're in your day to day. Are you able to feel good, be present, provide value, all those different things? And because that's so much of it is just stacking those days over and over and over and over again.
The way a lot of my mentality has shifted from before was like need to solve the world's problems.
Yeah.
To now like thinking about becoming a master bricklayer. Like every day I just show up, look at this structure and say, okay, like where can I like lay the next brick down? And just do that day in and day out. Like that's the enjoying part. You're doing the structure, you look at it, you're like, okay, not on the next one. That's what everybody does. If you don't do that, you usually get bored and you get depressed. It's like,
yeah,
enjoy the process. It's like something that I've had to learn a huge deal of.
I have a friend who's been on the podcast. His name's Chris Sparks, who's a productivity coach, and he's a poker player. He's like really, I think he was like number 6 in the world online poker player. Super smart guy. He has something he puts in, calls them fire breaks in his life, because he has a tendency to get ramped up and get super into what he's doing. And this fire break is like a designated time. I think it's multiple weeks where he disconnects and then has to like sit with himself to figure out what's going on. I think it's a great idea and something that I've taken from him and tried to implement in my own life. Taking time off the grid, a week, going hiking, just that type of experience, help you come back feeling so refreshed. It's crazy how much your brain can alter, and you can come back with new ideas, new things to bring into the business.
Yeah, I think you like subconsciously process so much when you just have solitude. Like solitude was a normal thing that we had in all of human history. I think the book Digital Minimalism talks a lot about this, Cal Newport, and sort of like how there's another one, I can't remember, Indistractable maybe. I don't know. There's been this movement sort of coming out now. People are like, what is going on with our environment? Like it's so artificial to be constantly stimulated, and just taking time off and having to sit with yourself and do nothing and like do simple tasks, go hiking, whatever, sit in the woods. It sucks for the first like 3, 4, or 5 days, usually for me. And then after that, it's like pure bliss. And then I come back feeling so refreshed. But if you don't structure those things ahead of time, once a quarter, once a year, whatever works for you, I mean, just the current of life is too strong for anybody to swim against. That's sort of like what I've learned as well. Like you need to take these breaks. Otherwise, like trying to like, you're going to get so exhausted and like caught in this current. And then you look back 3 years later and you're like, well, what the fuck am I doing this for? Like, what is the point of this anymore?
I think of it similar to like the frog that's in the pot. You know, if you drop a frog into boiling water, it'll hop out. But if it slowly warms up, it'll get boiled. I think of that to a certain extent with distractions and around success. With like Shopify is a good example. Like the little cha-ching noise that happens whenever you get a sale. When you first start out and the business is growing, it's like every once in a while, right? And it's an exciting thing. As the business becomes more successful, it's this like cascading cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching as sales are happening, and the distractions ramp up so much as well. And over time, if it starts slow and happens to increase, then like you kind of adapt to it. But if you were to take yourself before and then dump yourself into this like crazy chaos of a business that's running and growing really, really fast, it would be like, whoa, what is going on here? And I think your advice is so spot on, because when you're in it and you're working super hard and you're going in and day out, you adjust to your environment. And then it takes multiple days to step out to be able to say, is this actually what I want? We need to readjust tact. I want to wrap it up here. It's been really, really awesome. What's something that someone who's listening can take away from this episode that has maybe more on like the tactical side for Perfect Keto that has worked really well for you guys, or like maybe a way of thinking, a framework that they could take and implement in their own business?
I mean, I think we just like copied everything from everybody else, but I think like a lot of Dalio stuff around pain plus reflection equals progress, and just taking action. Like, I think people get too worried about not knowing what to do, when to do it, if they'll succeed, if they'll fail. You just have to do things sometimes. And the faster you can do things with structure and intention and reflection, the more you can learn to do more things. I think that a lot of people just get hung up too often and like self-doubt and not knowing if it's the right thing or whatever. You just need to do things all the time.
Do things all the time and then stop doing them.
Yeah. For a long period of time.
For a long period of time. If someone's interested in learning more about what you're doing and following along in your journey, you got a blog, you got a podcast, you're on Twitter, you got a newsletter, you got multiple companies. Where would you direct people? I love your newsletter. I think it's really, really good.
It's like me ranting once a week.
It's ranting. Yes. Where would you best direct people to find more about you?
Yeah, that's dranthonygustin.com/the feed for the newsletter. And then same on any channels. And yeah, I usually reply most on Twitter nowadays. I was Instagram for a long time, but I switched to Twitter. This is my new distraction.
Well, it's good too, because I love your interactions on Twitter. Most of the time it's like chill. Sometimes somebody will say something that like triggers your excitement about food and food policy.
That's one way to put it.
And you start bringing out the chairs and just start knocking heads. It's awesome. Thanks, man, for coming on and talking. It's always a pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
All right, here we go. Well, it don't matter. You got money. You ain't got no soul.
Hey guys, it's Austin, and if you've been loving the podcast, you got to go check out brandgrowthexperts.com. That's where I work one-on-one with my clients to help them build faster growing, more profitable online stores. I've got coaching programs and workshops that we host all over the world. Would love to have you come check it out. If you're a fast growing e-commerce business, or you want to be a fast growing e-commerce business, you got to check it out. That's the spot for you. We go more in depth than we do in the podcast with comprehensive trainings and coaching to help you scale up. Check it out, brandgrowthexperts.com. See you there.